Fire up that cool tchotchke that you bought at Pier 1 to summon the space kitty cats. It's Leisure Please, a hateful voyage through the Delta Quadrant. My name is Joseph.
And I'm the hot blonde hiding out in your beach simulator, Peter.
Oh, Peter, you are our celebrity. You're our Leisure Please celebrity. You're the face of our meme template.
I'm a big fucking deal right now, man. It's my 5 minutes in the spotlight.
In case you're not a member of the Leisure Please Trauma Support Group, possibly the only reason to have a Facebook account anymore.
Dude, for real. Like,
looks really much 2020 realness.
Like, all my other secret nerd groups are basically defunct. It's just which shade of Star Trek fandom do I want to engage in, and that's it.
But Meme Lord Darius reclaimed his throne by basically creating a Peter Drake meme template. Talking about his preferences for Harry Kim related temporal episodes, and it was 15 out of 10. Best I've ever seen.
Can't wait to see that getting abused and potentially getting me in trouble with law enforcement.
It's the way of the internet, my friend.
Of course.
So we welcome you back from our season 5 rip and our special review of Galaxy Quest. We hope you enjoyed all that, and we've resumed our journey now into season 6. Peter, what did we watch?
Well, before we get into business, man, let's just throw a little line out there. You should be listening to this episode after the posting of our Galaxy Quest Patreon special content, because we're nice dudes who are also lazy dudes that like to get a free podcast out there. We already didn't put one in the kitty.
We want to take a week off too.
We got to do a new Patreon special project. So if you've got a good idea for something outside of the normal Voyager wheelhouse, throw it up on the trauma support group or send us an email at VegerPlease@gmail.com. Have you gotten any email on that lately?
No one emails us. No one sends us DMs. We're boomers, so it's Facebook groups or nothing.
Anyways, you got a good idea for something for us to review, talk about, get too deep on, throw it up there. Maybe we'll grab the suggestion and run with it. But for right now, Joe, let me formally welcome you into Season 6, Episode 1 with Equinox Part 2. As we stand in the beginning of Season 6, and I look back on all of the work that you and I have done covering the first 5 seasons, we are now in the back half. We're in the home stretch. If we're talking TNG, we are in the best of the best season. And it's starting to scare me a little, Joe. Voyager's become a part of my life. You know, we're doing this week in, week out. I'm making my wife deal with this bullshit. Back when we could go out into public and interact with people, I'd talk to other nerds about it and kind of bond over the hidden nuggets of Voyager nerddom. And I think I'm genuinely going to be pretty sad when it's time for the show to go away. Like an STD touching my naughty bit that I can at least say, well, you know, parts of getting that were good. The other parts, now I'm stuck with this terrible stigma.
Yeah.
Pus.
I will say, and we did a lot of reflecting a couple weeks back when we did our rip. Overall, Voyager is improved as time has gone on. There has been a rise in the median quality of the show. I completely understand it growing on you. It has its charms, and I've always thought that it has. But as we go through the show, I maintain the thought that Voyager's reputation for being the kind of turning point when Trek went from the ascendant sci-fi pop culture property to kind of not anymore is still deserved. I think about the heights of TNG around this season 5, season 6 period, and I think about what the show was able to do in season 5 and where it's going in season 6. And there's good episodes. There's great episodes. There's just a lot of like B minus C plus bullshit and a lot of things that continue to play out in the same way that so many episodes do for Voyager, which is great idea, bad execution, or they just kind of missed on it, it just didn't quite work, or they didn't want to commit to really like investing in their own continuity or making you feel like this is a universe that's lived in. And here we are with, in my opinion, another great example of an episode that was really close to being great and instead was kind of a B minus.
You know who would agree with you, Joe?
Would that be Ron Moore? Because, oh boy.
You cannot watch this episode. We cannot talk about this episode without first acknowledging the fact that Ron Moore, who was the showrunner for DS9, right, has wrapped up DS9 and has folded into the Voyager's writing room, which is interesting because when you look at Equinox, like his name is not up front and center on the credits. This is going to be Bran Braddock, Joe Manowski, teleplay, those two plus Rick Berman on the story, directed by David Livingston. No mention up front on Ronald, but you feel the influence, and there's a very different tone, and I feel like some real wild shit goes on in this episode, which would be a great setup for change, for lasting change. But because there is not lasting change that is going to come from this, instead it just feels like some real wild mood swings and silliness.
It's almost like a view into the Voyager that could have been, in a weird way. Like, you can see where he wanted to go, and your mind can explore those vistas. And they're very appealing to people like you and me, right? Who I think we have dwelled almost excessively on some of the very themes that Ron Moore obviously picked up on here in, late 1999 when this came out. He was vibing where we're vibing, but he found out the hard way and very quickly that people making the show were not interested in doing what it is that he wanted to do.
So here's my question to you. Did he just never watch an episode of Voyager before? Like, how can you be a big shot muckety muck in the Star Trek universe, right? Again, he was show running DS9. This isn't some guy who's making the boss coffee. Like, this dude's got juice. And to be so either naive about what impact you could have on the writer's room in Voyager, or just completely out of touch with the reality of what the Voyager product was intended to be, for him to have such a spectacular conflict.
Pause one moment. I'm going to answer that question in a second. I just want to share this with you, Peter. I have my elderly Hitler cat.
Yeah.
And he did not like that I closed the door so much that he was
making
him. You heard him?
Yeah.
He was making a racket outside the door because his bed isn't here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, literally, it was like an old man, like, let me in.
Yep.
I'm not, this was amazing. All right.
Yep.
All right, buddy. I get you, buddy. I understand you. Trust me. Okay. All right. So we've solved that problem. To your point, I can't answer the lack of self-awareness, which is what you're, or at least, I don't know, you know what? Self-awareness might be right. I can't answer his lack of awareness of what we now know Voyager is. It could be that because he felt like he knew these guys, that it was just, that he just needed to be there and he would be able to quote unquote fix it. That kind of professional hubris, I don't think would be uncalled for, given that he was, in fact, a guy who was high up in the Star Trek production food chain. He knew these guys personally. He had a relationship with them. He may have overthought what impact he could have. or he could have just not known because he was too invested in doing his show, right? Like, he wasn't involved with Voyager. He, talked with these guys, I'm sure, now and then, but the Voyager was able to essentially write out of their own playbook and never have to worry about what DS9 was doing, so they had no reason to really work together. So for the last several years, they've been cordial professional colleagues in the same, Trek production universe in Paramount, but not involved with each other in the way that maybe he really knew. But regardless, Ron Moore clearly did not know what he was getting himself into. And he lasted exactly 3 episodes, this and the next 2. The only one where he has actually sole story writing credit is episode 2. But as we said from the jump, his DNA, his fingerprints are all over this, and I think that the good parts of the episode are that. We'll get to some specifics, but there's the underlying conflict between Chakotay and Janeway that plays out during this episode that is great. Something that you and I have called for jokingly, repeatedly.
I wasn't
for years. Or semi-jokingly, maybe not. Maybe
I was
you're not
real
joking
though.
at all. And then everything with Ransom, I think, ends up paying off very well because of the direction they go on with that. Classic Voyager mistakes. This episode probably needed like 6 more minutes, couple extra scenes to fucking explain itself a little bit better. It's another would have been a B plus, instead it's a B minus circumstance.
So we ended up in Equinox Part 1 with the Equinox having just ganked the special new Ghostbusters force field generator from Voyager. The crew had busted out of confinement on Voyager because evil EMH brought them a suitcase full of guns. They shot their way out. They beamed off. They never were, Voyager never thought to beam them back over, even though they were sharing a shield bubble. I want to say, didn't they kick Voyager's warp drive offline somehow?
I don't think they did so like for a long term. It was just so they could kind of scoot away.
Right.
But there was some interference with their propulsion, yeah.
They tripped them, and off they flew. And when they took off, they had also, in the process, abducted 7 of 9, kind of accidentally. And they had stranded Voyager behind them to be eaten up by ghosts. We saw some space buttholes opening on the bridge, and Janeway getting charged by one of the little ghost people. My general feelings on that previous episode, and you can go back for the full breakdown, but was that Ransom left a lot to be desired. I think that the performances and the stories left a lot on the table, and the whole thing came off feeling a little two-dimensional and too cut and dry. That Voyager good, Equinox bad.
And they felt like they rushed it a little bit, which it was just not enough time was spent allowing you to have any nuance. So we were in agreement there.
So we open up in episode 1, Equinox Part 2, with Janeway engaging in her favorite pastime, and that is shooting a laser into a spatial fissure to fix a problem. First time we really got treated to that was way back in the Candy Corn Tragedy, time and again. Just like the old days of season 1. And things are not going good on the bridge. These little goblins are flying out. Now, back in Equinox Part 1, we'll call this the Scorpion effect, right? Because we watch the bad guys, be it space goblins or species 8472. When the space goblins hit the Equinox crew members, it's a one-hit instant kill with some really grotesque shit going on. When 8472 hit the Borg, the cubes just blew up at the mere glance of the space Mewtwo's. But here, you get Chakotay and Janeway both get body checked by these space goblins, and no one dies.
I mean, they just they pop their plot armor, dude. They just tore that permanent willpower and they're good.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what happens when you're a main character. That shit that kills everybody else, it just brush you back a little bit, give you a touch of bad makeup for the next few scenes, because you're all wrinkly.
What kills anybody else just makes your cheek kind of look like a ball sack in cold water. For any of you ladies out there who do not have balls,
trust us, it's
if
like
you're
that.
ever wondering what a scrotum looks like in cold water, look at Chakotay's cheek or Janeway's face in the majority of this episode, and it's a pretty dead ringer. And again, maybe this is Ron Moore, but I thought those would have been some pretty cool scars to last the rest of the series as a stinging reminder of what happens when the Federation betrays its principles. I understand, that would have been a pain in the ass and not at all what Voyager's about. But as far as cool scars go, those could have been some good ones. So the bridge and the rest of the crew gets besieged by space goblins. Janeway has a last minute idea to make the deflector dish shit itself or something, and it reinforces the shields enough to repulse the space goblins, but it's too little too late. We end up with 13 wounded and 2 dead, and it's been a while since we've had any Voyager crew die.
I want to say it's probably been since... Oh, did any of the crew die in the Killing Games episodes? Do you think they had to have,
so.
right?
No.
Like the Hirogen had to have killed somebody.
No, and actually I want to say that the Memory Alpha will cite in continuity. Where is it? Okay, I want to say the Memory Alpha will actually say the last death that occurred was back in the 4th season, which was 1, and 1 was... That was when 7 and 9 had to stay awake while everybody else was in cryo sleep, and one of
that's right. That's when Jerry Ryan's body double got aced, right?
Yeah. That's what killed her. So Voyager crew's been having a good run, but no more. The space goblins get them, and we've gotten some scenes of Janeway very determinedly walking through the halls with her compression rifle. We'll see a corpse of one of the space goblins, and she is super duper upset. Now, back in part 1, I said that I felt that the use of space goblins instead of something more humane like Ocampa, some very human thing that we would really feel the evil coming off of the crew, that the lack, by using little space puppets as the victims, it made a little bit harder to vilify Ransom in my book. Janeway doesn't seem to agree with that at all in this, and I would say she comes off with more anger and venom towards his actions in this than seemed like it would have been possible by the setup they did in the first one. Granted, she's also scooted off with her science project 7 of 9, but I feel like they have Janeway jump off the deep end way too early in this.
I agree with you, and that's where I'm saying this episode needed an extra 6 minutes. I can buy Janeway getting to a place where her anger makes more sense in terms of the story. We'll get into Justified when we start to talk about her actual actions, but in terms of drawing the line, so to speak, from disappointed, this betrayal just happened, to I am now willing to start doing increasingly monstrous things if that means I'm going to get justice. And there is a gap there, essentially, of explaining why the fuck she's this angry. And they try to fill in those gaps with a scene that she later has with Chakotay in the ready room, but it's not enough. There isn't a core betrayal except of the idea of Starfleet principles. And I guess that's what you're supposed to buy, that the Equinox acting like a band of marauders murdering, space goblins to get home is the reason. Okay. I think that's probably good enough, but that we didn't see that kind of sketched out in the story where I felt like Janeway's rise to that level of anger was supported by what we saw on screen.
She has all the wrath of a jilted lover, and I feel that it's missing that personal connection for her to have the venom that she does.
Like maybe like if she had served with Ransom, or like Ransom was her first captain when she was like in a lieutenant or something, and like admired him. He was some kind of mentor, like some kind of
Had she
connection.
stuck her neck out on the line for him at some point in the past, there needed to be that personal spite.
Yeah, there needed to be a connection between the two of them that spoke to a betrayal that went deeper than just ethics, because they've had plenty of ethical conundrums on this show, and this level of anger for some people that you don't know, like even if you do think like, oh, they're giving the Federation a bad name and they're acting in a way that I personally distaste, like she was barely this angry at the fucking Borg, like give me a break, like come on. Come on, Catherine.
Absolutely. Like it I feel for the level she's at, given the fact she had never known him prior to this, he should have been fucking around with omega particles or something.
Yeah.
Like this really needs to be an omega level threat. Yeah, there you go. Like a big fucking deal. And it's Chakotay would have had to die in that attack for me to respect the level of crazy hate she's got. But she's rolling through the hallway. They get to sick bay, and we have what is supposed to look like a really crowded sick bay. Instead, it's a person in each bed, and then people strategically placed in the worst places possible on the floor, including directly in front of the doorway, so anybody walking will just trip over them. I used to have a dog, and when I'd sleep, he'd lay directly up against the door, so if someone opened the door, it'd bang into him, and I'm guessing that was like the guard dog bred into him. That's how security. That's how security has arranged dead and injured crewmen on the floor. Everybody's got their hands full, and we find out that Equinox, for all their terrible war crimes, was kind enough to leave behind the piece of 29th century hyper technology with the EMH still loaded in it.
It's Neelix who finds the EMH. I think it's Neelix's only scene. He finds the mobile emitter, takes it back to sick bay. They activate the doctor, and we know as the audience that it's actually the EMH from the Equinox, but he's physically exactly the same looking as the Voyager EMH. And he starts, treating everybody, but has that sort of suspicious eye raise observation of what's going on around him, and is clearly a little bit off. They don't really move that forward quite right away. And this scene in sick bay between Janeway and Chakotay is kind of where they start to put together the main conflict, which is going to be that Chakotay, hey, we need to stop these aliens from attacking us. We need to maybe find some way to communicate with them, deal with this issue before we do anything else. And Janeway's like, no, fuck that. We're going to go find Ransom. We're going to kill his ass.
Well, there's a exchange there that stood out to me. She's like, oh gosh, we can kind of hear what the message is, and then it sounds garbled crap or whatever. Like, this is going to be hard. And then Chakotay goes, well, I once figured out how to communicate with a Trellian C pod, so I can figure this out. It's like, how about last season when, like, you talked to chaotic space and brokered a deal to get...
Yeah, use your dream powers, bro. Come on.
Why are we making up you talking to dolphins when you've got a perfect example of doing just this very kind of long distance diplomacy? Why do they refuse to talk about that? Granted, the fight was awful, or the flight, as I like to call it, but you've got these great examples. Use them. We also get a nice up close shot of what we'll call the ball sack facial damage. And I'll say at this point, I'm not really. No, I do have my notes. Yeah, Doctor is definitely evil. So I don't know if they were trying to trick us or not, but.
The next scene is on the Equinox. Ransom is like chilling in his like beach like brain simulator, They got this little like synaptic thing that they can put on your neck to kind of like see vistas, and this one happens to be, Southern California. He turns it off because Seven of Nine is brought in by his goons, and he's like, "Hey, how about you help us out? Help us get home, huh? Wouldn't that be great? How about you do that?" And she's like, "No, you seem terrible." And then he's like, "Why don't I like sort of creepily do this thing with your hair?" She's like, "Yeah, that's kind of reinforcing that I think you're shit." And then he says, like, "All right, well, take her to sick bay, check her injuries, and then take her to the brig." And the scene in the sick bay is when they find out that the Voyager EMH is actually still on the Equinox because he was foiled by a pad, and is like, "What the fuck? What am I doing here?" Commander Burke's just like, "Oh, cool. Now you can just treat her."
Like, I like to call
this
entire exchange, and I quote, "the one time Seven doesn't go on a rampage."
Yeah, the one time she doesn't start like bodying people and beginning an active shooter situation.
The one time she does not fuck the entire ship up and make everybody her bitch. It's a wild inconsistency, and that's the problem when you set such a high power level on a character. Season 4, she was infallible, she was unstoppable, and nobody could get in her way. I mean, she's fucking up Hirogen, she's beating Borg's ass. You get in her way and she doesn't like you, and you're gonna get tossed into an ensign. And then at some point she just becomes like this damsel in distress that needs help. I mean, she got her ass kicked a fair amount in season 5, like the other evil. It's the second time, I guess, the EMH has victimized her in recent memory. The first time being, what was that, Warhead, right?
Yes.
But anytime someone has her at phaser point, it just comes off as so weak and so silly. Especially these guys who are malnourished and all their shit's fucked up. Like, I feel like she should have just gone Terminatrix and shot the joint up, but she doesn't.
Peter, they grabbed her on her arm, and as we know from television, if you grab a lady on the arm, that makes it so they can't do anything. It's a great trope. There's a YouTube video that shows like all these ridiculous situations where suddenly someone is rendered helpless because someone has grabbed them roughly on the arm. Because it's hard to do kinetic action on screen on a small budget, so that's all they do.
And here I thought the Vulcan nerve pinch was the strongest grip available to the Star Trek universe. I stand corrected. Time goes a little weird with this 7 and 9 hostage situation, right? We'll later come to find out that Equinox has grabbed a couple more space goblins and crushed them down into go juice. Ransom's ready to sink him into the Mr. Fusion hooked up to the warp core so they can shoot forward to the next jump gate or whatever, however these burst transactions work. And as they go to punch it, we find out that before 7 of 9 could be subdued down in engineering, she somehow encrypted the systems. So these trash cans they've got hot wired onto the side of the warp core will not function, and the Equinox is going to be stuck at its maximum warp 6. Ransom goes into this interrogation, kind of an interrogation, says, "Listen, you got the codes, we need them back." She's like, "No." Ransom plays the listen, Borg efficiency. You understand that what I'm doing is just trying to be as efficient as possible, and the ends justify the means. And she's like, "Well, too bad for you. It took me 3 seasons of having to play out the same story over and over again, but it finally stuck. And now I'm a good person who does not value Borg efficiency anymore. And you're a bad man with your bad touch. I don't want to help you." And he says, "Well, I'm going to have the EMH help me pull the information I need out of you." And in the process, he disables the EMH's ethical subroutines and turns him into another Mr. Hyde, like the first evil EMH we saw that was still over on Voyager, and says, we can dig out that ocular implant or whatever that big brass chunk is in your frontal lobe and extract the information we need, but it's going to turn you into like
a vegetable.
Yeah. So it seems to me like it should be a pretty straightforward process, because the doctor's like, oh, it'll only be a couple hours. Yet over the course of this, it almost seems like we go through a week or two of action. But discussing this plot thread as a whole, I was disappointed, and even the EMH will come to say it, that the only thing standing between the doctor being your friend and a reasonable person is one ethical subroutine. Like, you get rid of his ethics and all of a sudden he is ignoring all of his allegiances and loyalties. He's following rogue commanders and committing, Mengele level space experiments.
That is the other part of this episode that needed extra time to me. I completely agree with you that the idea that they were just like 2 keyboard punches away from turning the Doctor into a supervillain with zero hesitation did a tremendous disservice for his character. And the fact that he was just kind of like, oh, that was pretty disconcerting there at the end while reflecting on it, was just like, there needed to be some scene where either that, what I had in mind is just this is the Doctor's best friend, right? Someone he's secretly in love with, 7 of 9. And he's essentially turning them into a vegetable to serve a bunch of mass murderers. And there needed to be a moment where 7 is like trying to get through to him and appealing to, their relationship, and, drawing on all that stuff that is good continuity of like, I have turned into a better person and I now am making an emotional appeal in the somewhat limited way into which I am now capable of doing. And where he like has that lane where he's expressing like, I'm trying to stop. I'm making this take longer because that's all I can manage right now. Like, communicate that, right? I'm trying to buy Janeway time to stop me because I'm not fully in, like, my program is expanded enough where the deletion of my ethical subroutines doesn't completely stop me, but I'm still under the control of this computer. And so I can't not do it, but I can do it as slowly as I can. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
here's what I would have liked. Let me rewrite this.
Okay.
Ransom thinks he can just turn off the ethics, and now he's going to have the EMH do whatever he wants because their EMH was far inferior to theirs. Ransom turns off the EMH's ethics, and then the Doctor like instantly slits someone's throat with a scalpel, and now that he's not bound by that, goes on this semi-limited rampage of fucking people up because he doesn't want to be there. He wants to free his friend. And there's the real thing the ethics are doing, is stopping the hologram from being a mass murderer, right? And then they go, oh shit, turn him off.
It's too late. I've learned my skills to the best. I call this the suitor.
Bust someone over the head with a pipe.
Exactly. Just like all of a sudden he just picks one up. There's plenty of space debris around. It's like, you've left me with the most powerful weapon in the universe. This is full on. Bam.
They turn him off, and then Ransom says, computer reinitialize EMH with shackles, force it to comply, and they bring him back on with a third-party program actively forcing his hand, and we see the distress in him as now he's forced to comply, and it keeps him human while still highlighting his inhuman limitations, right? Not just, hey, I'm going to take away your ethics, and now you're totally cool with aiding me and torturing the woman you love and all this other bad stuff. You're absolutely, unless the goal of this was to say, hey, all the character development and humanization we've made you come along with us on the Doctor really is just all bullshit, and his program tricking you, he really is just a flat image, and you move one part out of focus and you can have something this crazy happen. And right on the heels of Warhead, that seems like a real big step back. I would say that's a huge botch on this episode.
Agreed. And it didn't have to be that way if there was just some way for them to have communicated in the story that the Doctor was resisting in a limited capacity, right? That's all it would have taken to retain so much of his progress. But instead, this like made him out to be an automaton. Like
And
even more.
enjoy harming her too. Like the
Yeah.
absence of his ethics introduced sadism to the plate. Like I would say he was just as evil in this as he was in the Darkling, and that was real shitty to see. Ultimately she'll come out with any sort of brain damage and completely unscathed because
Yeah, like he tortures her by making her sing. And it's gleeful for him.
Mhm.
Like any excuse to have Jerry Ryan sing for you, I guess. But it's almost over the top, and it would have been again completely justified if it was something the Doctor was doing specifically to buy time for some kind of intervention,
Yeah.
delaying it. And that like it fed into the idea that his ethics had been deleted, but he was still finding a way to like accomplish his goal of not doing this thing that he's being forced to do. But anyway,
We're
instead it's
making a
just
big deal out of it because he is, I would say, easily the best, most developed Voyager character on the cast. So it's a shame to see that much of a mishandle. And I'm
one of our
curious.
favorite episodes from last season was the pivotal Doctor growth episode where he learns to actually deal with this conflict in his program by coming to terms with a moral choice he made, which is something like an emergence of sentience beyond programming, like a complexity that suggests he's a true intelligence rather than a complex piece of software, right? And it's a huge deal because Janeway like cops to the fact that they had to let him do it and that it takes a while, but he makes it. He does it. He finds a way to make it there. And then beep boop, you're a monster now. Okie dokes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Way to go, guys. Thanks.
I also want to touch on a thing real quick here. Ransom. So is the underlying thread in all this that Ransom is a coward? His tactics when confronted with enemies, whether it's the Klingons or the Romulans, is to hide. He has a very stressful situation on the ship. He seems to go into this escapist beach simulator a lot. He's got a easy way to get home at a great cost. And rather than do the hard thing, which is slowly make your way home like Voyager is, he's taking shortcuts. Like, is he a weak person? Is he a coward? Is that what they're basically putting on the table?
I don't know if I would say that it is. Okay. I don't know if about coward so much as not conflict oriented. I think that the ending, this goes back to something I said during the rip about it's easy to die for a reason, it's hard to die for no reason, you know? The character journey of Ransom is that he saw no choice but for him to do the monstrous things he did because he didn't want to confront the idea that him and his crew would just slowly bleed out in the middle of the Delta Quadrant, tens of thousands of light years from home for no reason. And he confined himself to these choices that were terrible by telling himself he didn't really have one because the alternative was so unthinkable. And now, even though that alternative is no longer the only one on the table, he's locked himself into that because he doesn't want to confront it. I don't know if I would call that cowardice because in the end, he actually does confront that and he bites the bullet, right? Like he says, I'm gonna save my people and I'm gonna die in the process and I'm gonna own up to this choice that I made by making a better one. It's more the banal and very human predilection for self-rationalization of poor choices. And that's why I really like it. That's why I always liked his character, because he's more realistic. He's not the super heroic, perfect Starfleet captain. He's kind of a squirrely dude who's very willing just to hide in nebulas and, not do the really hard make the hard choices. But somewhere deep inside him is that capacity.
It'll play out interesting as things go. I think a lot's done to redeem his character as far as interesting in my eyes, and his interplays with the Doctor and Seven are a big part of that. And the reason I mentioned the coward thing is, as Seven kind of tells him off and forces him to confront the easy ways out that he's taking, even having, a very two-dimensional evil cardboard cutout of the Doctor say, "Oh, it's your only choice." Like, he's like, "Oh yeah," and like that's enough to keep him going and kind of hold his sanity for the moment. Back on Voyager, we've got the first attempt to try and reconcile things with the aliens. They've got a message they're going to play, and as a show of goodwill, they're going to drop the shielding around the bridge and invite basically the space goblins over to bring him to the negotiations table. And as they're getting ready to do it, we have a very Chakotay moment where he goes, "All right, guys, put your guns away. Someone needs to be the first to show a real sign of diplomacy." And Janeway just shuts his ass down, like, belay that order. We're going to have guns out and pointed so we really express how serious we are about peace, I guess. And
it's the first real inflection point of the conflict between Janeway and Chakotay of like, we will come in peace. Janeway's like, fuck peace, we come armed. It's like we're beaming into the office of a planet's president. We come with guns.
It's a great episode for Chakotay and a real bad episode for Janeway.
Oh yeah,
because I would say Chakotay rides deep on his what we would think his character Bible is, right? He's sticking to his DNA, and Janeway is just so deep in crazy town and acting so uncharacteristic that again, I really think that there should be some consideration that she's under an alien influence at this point for as erratic as she's behaving. But at this point, it's still kind of masked. The Chakotay Janeway conflict is hands down the best part of this episode.
It is, because we've seen the two of them kind of evolve in terms of their relationship over the course of these 5 going into 6 seasons. So we're far more invested in that than the story of someone like Ransom, who we know isn't going to be long for the show. He's a guest star. He's clearly probably going to be out, one way or the other after this episode. I really like his story, but I'm not invested, right? Like this is the thing.
This could have lasting consequences.
It's even portrayed in a way that it should, because it isn't just, first it's Janeway wants to do, okay, I'll try to communicate, but we doing it with guns. That doesn't work. Okay, Chakotay's like, all right, let's try this again, and Janeway's like, nah, we going and we're gonna go get Equinox now. We did it. We tried your thing and it didn't work. They have their first sort of back and forth in the ready room, where she like expresses like, yeah, I'm angry, I'm pissed, I want to fucking get this guy because he's a Starfleet captain and he is doing dirt and I will not stand for it. Again, it kind of feels a little displaced because there isn't a personal connection. It's just apparently entirely on ethics, which is just kind of thin. It just is.
There's another beat that gets missed here too, and I didn't realize it until right now, but all of her anger purely based on the fact that you have someone who took the Starfleet oath doing bad things because of their own warped ethics. Like, it's this direct mirror to the Maquis and Chakotay. Chakotay was a Starfleet officer. Chakotay turned his back on Federation and Starfleet principles and went off and did terrible terrorist shit and murdered people and did bad stuff. So like all the stuff she's accusing Ransom of, she's got embodied in Chakotay, and that's a lot of hypocrisy. And again, they don't, Chakotay could have been like, listen, you got this crazy hate for him, like, is that the same hate you harbor for me and the rest of the Starfleet Maquis and the crew? Or, have you seen past that and seen that people can change and get better? Like, that would have been a big mess to bring out on screen, and certainly not enough for one episode to cover. But it's becomes this real complex situation. They call these the space goblins in. They don't shoot, but the things shriek and then fly away. It's during the scene that you really notice how much damage Voyager's taken in these attacks. It seems uh it seems like a lot based on what the like I get the space goblins can melt people, but maybe the space goblins only melt people on the Equinox, and on Voyager they leave huge scorch marks on the wall. Tear the ceiling down, but the bridge takes a lot of damage through a couple interactions with these things.
Yeah, there are surprisingly, like, over the course of the episode, growing areas of damage, right? They seem to make a real production point of like that this continued problem is putting stress on the ship, and we're going to show that physically in the background without calling too much attention to it. It just kind of happens.
And it also kind of acknowledges the fact that Janeway's willing to cut off her nose to spite her face. Like, yeah, she wants to get ransom, and she gets like this crazy. I feel like so often lately, Voyager's been going to the Moby Dick trope of the deranged captain who's has
from
their
Hell's
whale
Heart,
up.
I stab at thee. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, you're letting your ship fall apart around you as you go after this one thing. We start to learn about Ransom's history of hiding from problems. That clues Janeway into the fact that he might be hiding in a low orbit somewhere, and they try to pinpoint it. There's a couple more bouts of sparring between her and Chakotay, where Chakotay's like, listen, we need to fix this problem, and he kind of pleads his case. And she gets more and more forceful with her reactions to the very reasonable things he's putting on. And it's interesting, again, like Chakotay becomes most interesting when he's got a female antagonist to play off of, whether it's Seska or his crazy Borg girlfriend, or Seven of Nine, or apparently now Janeway. When's the last time? Oh, Scorpion would have been the last time he really was at odds with Janeway. And there will be a throwaway line in there later on, like, you've never openly defied one of my orders before. And it's like,
actually, yes, he did so when you were incapacitated in Scorpion Part 2.
So
it was the whole thing.
He shot all your Borg buddies out of the airlock. Like,
yeah, he hated the Borg, and you didn't that day for some reason, to the regret of everyone in the Delta Quadrant. Anyway, so we've kind of summed up a lot of what already happens on the Equinox. They're trying to get their alien go juice kitten murdering machine UAC Helltech working, and the Doctor is torturing Seven of Nine to eventually get them there. The sequence of events are essentially Elder Vampire and Extra are on the surface of this planet trying to find deuterium. And Chakotay's terrorist ambush background finally comes in handy, and they ambush these two and whisk them back up to the ship in a Bagman mission. And the evil EMH actually makes contact with the Equinox to say, hey, yo, boss, Voyager is onto you. They know where you are, and they've polarized their hull plating so that you can't detect them with your sensors. They gonna get you. And so they get wise at the last second so that they can get their weapons online to put up a fight, and eventually use the atmosphere to sort of like dip under it to force Voyager to break off his pursuit so they can
it's like
get
a
away.
Game of chicken that works out pretty well. Couple things on this. One, the CG work in the ship battles and all the ship shots really is top notch. I felt in this episode, it's really cool seeing other Starfleet vessels on screen. I think the special effects budget is there, and it's clear that whoever they brought over to maybe help from visual effects on Deep Space Nine knew what they were doing when it came to ship combat. The Nova class, I think, looks really cool and really great on screen, and it's very enjoyable watching this play out.
Also, the model of the Nova class, that like the actual model for the Equinox, really great attention to detail that it's all fucked up. Right? Yeah. Like the ship is super fucked up on the inside, but also on the outside you see like all these scorch marks and blown out bulkheads, and like it's had a rough go, right? Like it's still together but not whole. and they make a point of the model not being pristine on the outside as well.
So here's the disconnect, though: is you have Equinox, which is a little bullshit science vessel that was the replacement for the Oberth uh, Zeppelin explosion extravaganza, right? It's a
right,
science ship. Then you've got Voyager, which is anything from a deep space exploration vehicle to a Dominion era warship, right?
right.
That's in great working order versus this other thing that was held together with popsicle sticks and duct tape, where Void or Janeway was just like, yeah, scrap this thing. And the Equinox holds its own in every fight they get in. Granted, later on they're like cheating with some Generations style sneak us the shield frequency action, but like they're shooting torpedoes, they're shooting phasers. As stingy as Voyager has supposedly been with using its photon torpedoes, like Equinox, which is supposed to be completely out of resources, has an infinite wealth of torpedoes to shoot at Voyager, and it's just like you got
It,
you got the quarterback of the football team fighting a
the
science
kicker,
guy with polio, right?
right?
And instead it comes out looking like some sort of popular boxing match between two well-known names instead of one side just cleaning the floor with the other.
I like so we've postulated in the previously that there's some background that you can justify where Voyager, noting they're going to need more photon torpedoes, makes a deal with some alien race that has similar technology to make more photon torpedoes. We just never saw that episode. Fine, right? Like, I can believe that. But I just love the idea of this poor Nova class ship that is desperately looking for all the resources it can, and it's going like room to room in the dungeon trying to find like a health potion. It just keeps finding torpedoes. It's like, damn, and another 20 torpedoes. Oh, I'm at 6 HP, but I've got 80 torpedoes. Oh no, whenever am I going to have use for these? Literally, there's a line when they get into their second fight where they're like, yeah, we don't have phasers, but we got all the torpedoes and fire. Just
Yeah, these are torpedoes. These are torpedoes for science, because we're a science vessel. So the whole secondary hull is just full of torpedoes. They do the ambush, and at this point you've got the good EMH and 7 trapped on the Equinox. Now we've got Alpha Vampire and 1 rando trapped on Voyager, and we get the best part of the episode, which is Janeway, who is super off the deep end, Captain Ahab time, takes the Alpha Vampire, and she's like, listen, tell me everything I want to know. And he's like, or what? You're gonna hit me? Like, I'm not giving up the details on the captain, and you can confine me to the brig or whatever, but no. And she's, playing this bad cop angle, and he looks over at Chakotay and he's like, well, now you're going to play good cop. And Chakotay is like, as far as I know, we don't have a script on this. And at that point, I thought Chakotay was being kind of playful. I didn't realize that he was starting to establish an outsider relationship with Janeway.
I
And
like
Janeway's
the idea of Janeway Breaking Bad, like the idea that she gets pissed and how like Kmart Group portrays it is good. I think it's unsupported by the script, but I have no problem with how she goes about it, particularly in this scene. Like the line of "We all make our own hell, Mr. Lessing," like that. Oof, that one was good.
Had there been an alien influence pushing her to this extreme, had there been an earned blood hatred of Ransom, and we could justify her actions, yeah, absolutely. No shade being thrown at Kate Mulgrew. This is squarely a failure of the script. Everything she does, her descent into hatred and evil, A+. And had this been earned, and had this been something that could last, and we could have turned Chakotay and Janeway into enemies moving forward based on these events, like, there's some real savory meat on the bone here. This is the stuff that could have really carried the next 2 seasons of plot. But
yeah, instead Chakotay starts to disapprove of Janeway's plan of I am going to unleash the murder, the aggrieved space cats upon the elder vampire. I'm not okay with this, and he tries to intercede. Janeway's locked out the computer, and again, the show has some brilliant moments, particularly in its camera work. There's a beat where he gets his phaser out. You don't know what he's going to do, right? Like, he just looks at her and gets his gat out. And you're like, are you going to shoot your boss? Like, this is Voyager. We shoot our bosses here. That does happen. But, like, what are you going to do? Which was cool because they just, the way it was framed and the way, like, you had Beltran, like, looking kind of at Janeway. You're like, you don't know what he's going to do. You don't know what he's considering. But instead, he turns around and goes back inside the cargo bay and closes the rifts with the phaser and pulls Lessing out and throws him up against the bulkhead and be like, okay, you did it, buddy. You're loyal to your captain. How about instead of selling him out, you give me information about the aliens that taught you how to summon these fools in the first place? And Janeway, the way they show her discontent with what he's doing is that she just walks in between them and leaves the scene without saying anything. It's just so good. Like, all of this is so good in terms of the performance, and just like they're doing things they never do with just the body language and the facial expressions and just the unspoken parts of the performance. And it's a shame there isn't more shit like this.
This is A+ Chakotay stuff. I mean, this is right in his wheelhouse. It's ethics, it's disobedience, it's doing the right thing no matter the cost. We've seen this kind of stuff out of him before in Scorpion, and all I could say in my notes is fuck yes, Chakotay. I was really excited to see where this was going to go. There is a staff meeting, and they lay out on the table that they're going to go and try and find these the aliens who introduced Equinox to the space goblins, and that Lessing's the one who spilled the beans. We get what I thought was foreshadowing from the evil EMH, and he's like, did any of the other plans get revealed? And I was like, oh damn, evil EMH is going to go kill this guy with the hypo spray. That, because again, my assumption is you're never going to see these people past this episode, that Ransom's going to die and everybody on Equinox is going to die, and that we're going to have to find a way to kill off the other Equinox members who are on the ship. And how better than a evil AI EMH who has access to a suitcase full of guns and hypo sprays full of poison. But at the end of that, we get another confrontation between Janeway and Chakotay, where she goes to put him on blast, and instead he puts her on blast. And it's juicy stuff. She drops, you've never openly disobeyed me because I don't remember Scorpion at all. And Janeway makes it real clear that she is evil now. And I'm like, we've talked a lot about maybe Chakotay needs to do some mutiny action. And if there's ever been a case for it, I would say it's this episode.
And what is, of course, the most stunning part of all of these revelations is that the scene is capped by Chakotay going, yeah, Kathy, if you ever do anything like that again, I will mutiny. I am not gonna let you do that. Like, I don't know if you are aware of this, but I totally quit Starfleet and became a terrorist out of an ethical regard for what I thought was the right thing to do, and you're terrible now.
Kathy, you better watch your ass, because I don't know if you've noticed or not, but they haven't played the bullshit Indian flute one time this episode. I'm being for real right now, and I will fuck your shit up.
I'm being for real.
I will fuck you and today's haircut right up.
So he gets relieved of duty, can find the quarters, and is not seen until the very end of the episode. After that scene, like straight up, just like go to space jail. You're done now.
He gets a warrior's death. They track down the Ankari, and that again is the race that introduced Ransom and his crew to the high octane space goblins. Janeway hails them, and they don't want to listen. So that Janeway's like, slap a a tractor beam on him, and then even Tuvok's like, "Hey, wait a minute!" And she's like, "Shut up! I put Chakotay in the corner. Do you want to go in the corner too?" Very disappointed that you didn't have a stronger showing from Tuvok. You've never seen both Tuvok um and Tuvok and Chakotay both unite against Janeway's wishes when she's acting crazy. And I think, again, this would have been a really good episode to finally bring that to fruition. But Tuvok's balls shrink and he's like, "Okay, Captain, we'll put him in a tractor beam." And then we have our little meeting with him. For as good as the Voyager one-off alien races have been and looked, like, these Ankaran are the complete antithesis. They've got these garbage bag masks that look terrible.
They look
Their
very
mouth
plasticky. They're not moving right. Like, I think they probably looked fine in episode 1 because those characters didn't talk. They were totally immobile, so it looked fine then. But then they're like, okay, so we've got this look and we've got this thing, and then they're like, okay, now they're gonna have a dialogue, and there's just like the whole fucking thing moves when they talk. I'm like, oh no, that doesn't look good at all.
It did not look good at all.
The actual, like, I'm gonna put you in jail dialogue doesn't come up until the next scene, which is when the Ankari actually come on to Voyager to help them communicate with the aliens, when Janeway breaks even further bad and it makes a deal with the aliens that they can destroy the Equinox in exchange for not attacking Voyager anymore, and that Voyager will help deliver that onto them. But just to show like how dedicated she is to the task. And also, I think around this time is when Ransom randomly has that scene where he finds this strange hot blonde woman, and his mind escapes. Like, oh, I wonder who that could be. I've certainly not met any attractive blonde ladies lately. I don't know why my subconscious could possibly be doing this. Pay it no mind.
I thought for a moment that somehow Seven of Nine had like gotten her consciousness in there to appeal to him. She says, like, he's like, "What are you doing in here?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm hiding. Same thing as you." And I was like, is that really Seven of Nine, like, retreating to another place? No, Seven of Nine is just completely useless, laid out on the table, being tortured by the doctor. It's just a figment of Ransom's imagination.
It would have been cool if, like, she had explained that, because of the nature of the cortical stimulation of that alien technology allowed like her own cortical implant to broadcast to it to communicate with them or something.
Wow,
like,
what a great plot point that could have been, Joe.
Yeah, look at that technobabble I ripped off in 10 seconds. Like, not hard. Just so that like Seven of Nine
could some have agency.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it could have played up to a new aspect of her character of now she's the one attempting to bring the humanity out in someone, because she's learned from Janeway, and it's like the other side of the coin of like Janeway's breaking bad and doing all this bad shit, while her protege in humanity, Seven of Nine, is actually learning from her prior example of, I'm going to try and convince this guy to do the right thing because that's what I have been taught to do.
It's been a while since we've plot doctored a script up, but I feel like just between the couple of things we've thrown out here, like, you've taken what's a B- and probably elevated it to an A. For them to have had an entire season between Equinox 1 and Part 2, and for this to be the best they could come up with is a real head scratcher. Like, what the fuck?
It's disappointing. Like, this is not a bad episode by any stretch of the imagination, but is such a miss because there was all this potential that was laid out, and they didn't allow themselves to fully take advantage of it. And instead, it's the standard Voyager great idea, bad execution, rush product that we have come to grudgingly enjoy for what it is, but still lament. The end result here, the big crescendo is Ransom finally cops to his own guilt about what he has done, and that this has to end, and that he does have a choice, and his choice can be that he can get his people over to Voyager and he can accept the responsibilities for what he has done, that being kill these aliens. And he tries to do that, his first officer, Burke, is like, no, I'm actually a total sociopath now. I'm down with
Yeah.
murdering aliens. So
He's been
fuck you.
between season 5 and season 6. Apparently, he got a big bag of crazy pills and ate all of them.
he's like he had like a quick a communicator scene with Balana where he's like, this is one of our
Talking
games,
shit
man.
on Xbox Live with her.
Yeah, like it's a shame. It's like, people are dying, and he just says it's a shame that you have to be one of them, and just turns it off. Like, oh, okay, you're just a complete asshole then. Like, you seem to be just a sort of ends justify the means. I'm my boss's bag man, and I'm willing to do the dirt because I'm in it to win it. To yeah, I just like killing things now. I'm a sociopath. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Bit of a
I
change.
I feel like Ransom's heel face turn, like his decision that he wants to be a good guy after all and throw himself to Voyager's mercy, somehow I feel like it was justified. Like, it didn't seem unearned. It seemed like he did have a legitimate breakthrough. I'd say it's good acting, and the plot steps were there. That when he's like, we're going to try it the right way, and I'm going to face up, because that was one of the things that he mentioned a few times back in part 1 was like, I don't want to sit in a brig. There was definitely a fear component to why he ran, and him accepting responsibility for what had been done and his desire to atone. Like, it felt good. I was like, maybe this is going to turn out pretty interesting after all. And instead, Burke going two-dimensional evil guy and pulling a mutiny offsets that. So blonde engineering lady's like, all right, I'm going to take him down to the brig. Instead, she takes him down to engineering and is like, hey, I'm on your side after all. And he's like, great, we're going to undermine Burke and try and wrestle this thing out of the trash fire.
So the plan is to transport all of the remaining Equinox crew members over to Voyager. This requires him to contact Janeway, and he says, listen, this is my plan. This is what we're going to do. I was going to just surrender, but Burke has decided that he's not down for that. So I'm gonna do this instead. And the other like side of this needed more time, Janeway immediately goes from I am willing to make deals with aliens to kill you to sate my vengeance, and also I've imprisoned my first officer and probably my closest friend over my desire to kill you, to okay, now that's fine. Like that. Like just in an instant. Like
what the
why?
fuck?
Why? It's like
what?
What? But why, Doe?
Her, we talk about how she's at the mercy of writing, and that sometimes she's great and sometimes she's terrible and sometimes she's dumb. It just like her character may as well be a set of wind chimes, and she'll sing the song whatever way the breeze is blowing. It's almost infuriating. Like, if any other captain in Star Trek was this wishy-washy on stuff, man. There's another space combat exchange where Voyager starts getting its ass beat because evil EMH is still broadcasting on a secret subspace band to Equinox and feeding it inside info. Any other time in Star Trek, you'll recall when Harry Kim was trying to talk to his 90s hottie girlfriend in the STD episode, right?
Right.
And everybody on the bridge, it's like Tuvok, Chakotay, and Paris are all instantly aware about the secret signal going out. And that's like a Federation wonder child, Harry Kim, ultimate engineer, sneaking a signal out to talk to his girlfriend. You've got the fucking doctor sneaking these signals out and nobody can figure it out. Finally, they'll close a loophole on it. Anyways, Equinox sends one of its billion photon torpedoes in, fucks Voyager up pretty good. Voyager's like, okay, that's enough. Hammers it, blows up a warp nacelle in a really cool looking shot. Equinox goes flying out of warp, and it's rare you see a ship coming out of warp damage, so that looks cool. Voyager follows it. They're fighting. People are getting beamed around. evil Burke is left up on the bridge with a few stupid loyal crew members, and you got Ransom down in engineering trying to fly the ship away because apparently now it's finally going to blow up and he needs it to be safe, and I got to go down with the ship. I figured the space goblins were just going to ravage him, but instead he gets, the hero death, and it's Ransom, or it's Max that gets punished. He gets to experience the hell he created for himself.
Yeah, the ending is a good one. He gets to have that heroic send off. Like, hey, I'm gonna go ahead and go down with the ship and pay my penance. Get my people home, and he puts on his little beach simulator to die in a peaceful, meditative pose on the Southern California coast, and it's beautiful. And then I think to your surprise, you get a scene where there's suddenly new crew members on Voyager.
New crew members with names and stories and histories. And I'm like, wow, I would have put full money that all of these people died. This is amazing. You got the blonde security guy who, I forget who he held at gunpoint. You got the alpha vampire blonde lady. I forget who was in there. And you get Janeway dressing them all down about strip and rank. They're just crewmen now. They're going to have to earn their keep. She got the wool pulled over eyes, blah, 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 blah. And out, we're going to march you. And I'm like, damn, that's some really good opportunity here. But the door she sends him out is actually a door labeled never to be seen from again, with the exception of one security guy that Memory Alpha says he shows up in one other episode as a background member. So huge miss.
Yeah. They set this up and then did nothing with it. Particularly because they had established personalities, like you said, over the course of 2 episodes where we got to see them in action, where I would have loved to have seen a episode, down the line of Marla Gilmore trying to work in engineering and gain the trust of the people that she betrayed, right? Because she's got this, warm personality. Like we saw that in the first one, she interacted with Naomi Wildman and all this other stuff. And,
who is this lady? Was she super expensive and we could never use her again? Are people just pissed that Ron Moore wrote her in to live, and they're like, fuck it, we're never using her again?
I will say the best part of this closing scene is it may be the longest single shot scene for this entire show that we've seen to date. The last scene starts at the beginning of that briefing room dressing down and then goes to the end of the episode. So that is all one shot. And it starts in the briefing room. She dresses him down. She does all of that. They leave. She's with Chakotay. He comes into frame behind her. They leave together to go onto the bridge. The camera is kind of comes up and follows them. Janeway comes in to the forefront of the bridge while Chakotay's in the back. First, Chakotay's is in focus. Then it's Janeway, and they have all their dialogue, and it ends with them finding Voyager's dedication plaque on the ground. It's really cool. It's very cinematic way they do all of that, right? It's very movie-like, and a high level of technical skill that, again, we don't see a lot in Voyager. We don't typically see a lot in TV of this era, so it was neat that they did all of that. And it's a very, if I'm not to put too different point, it's a very Battlestar Galactica move, right? When you think about kind of the way they would do camera work and walk and talks in that show, it's like that. The ending dialogue is an attempt to bridge the gap back between Janeway and Chakotay, but it is definitely an awkward one. They're talking about, we're going to go do a potluck that Neelix is putting together to up crew morale. They're kind of walking around the bridge. It's super fucked up. Chakotay's making a point of looking at the damage. Janeway has this clearly pained expression on her face because she's starting to reckon to the moral damage that she's done as a consequence of her actions, and eventually just approaches the issue with Chakotay to say you would have had reason to mutiny yourself. There was cause. And then Chakotay says, yeah, and I did think about it. I was on the table. but I chose not to because I thought I would be crossing the line. And that's kind of where they leave that, right? Like, yeah, I thought about it. I thought about mutinying, the ultimate crime against you. And you admit I wouldn't have been completely wrong to do so. So that's weird. It's going to be weird now. And it's such a great setup for, like you said, a whole season worth of conflict between the two of them, where like there's a serious rift that is formed because of what happened here. And they really leave you with that impression that that's going to be the case.
Or
And
it
then
would have
it's
been a
not.
great time if we're going to add an extra 6 minutes into the episode, some sort of reflection of Janeway where she says, I don't know what came over me. I've never been that mad about anything in my life. Maybe this has exposed a character flaw to me. Or had she had a reasonable reason for going off the deep end to reflect on just how much it bothered her. But instead, it's like the fever breaks and the crazy Janeway that was willing to sacrifice the entire ship to get ransom is gone, and she has no acknowledgement whatsoever that that was just way off character for her. So
allow me to quote Ron Moore's criticism of this episode from the man himself.
This is just, I was wondering if we were going to get into this because we're already at an hour 17 minutes. Like I think this is worth it though.
Yeah. So there's a lot in the Memory Alpha about Ron Moore's actual like comments about this.
Whatever good plot you thought was in this episode is nothing compared to Ron Moore going both barrels in the Memory Alpha.
And some of what he has to say is obviously quite good about how what the potential was for this episode, and we've touched on that, but this to me is the part that struck me. The things that Janeway does in Equinox don't work because it's not about anything. She's not really grappling with her inner demons. She's not really under the gun and suffering to the point where you can understand the decisions she's made. She just kind of gets cranky and bitchy. She's having a bad day and these things keep popping around on her bridge. And we just keep cutting to shots of people grabbing phaser rifles and shooting and hitting the red alert sign over and over again. It doesn't signify anything. It's kind of emblematic of the show. There's a lot of potential and there's a lot of sauce and sizzle going on in a lot of episodes, but to what end? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to touch in the audience? What are we trying to say? What are the things we're trying to explore? What are we doing in this episode? That was my fundamental question. I mean, what else can you say, right? Like the dude gets it. And he gets what doesn't work.
What else could you say? You could say the entire second paragraph where he goes on to further criticize it. Like I'll be very interested watching the Memory Alpha for the next couple episodes while he's in that writings room and what else he's saying. And unsurprisingly, it'll go on to say that this shaped the Pegasus experiences and crisis that BSG will encounter, where we see what could have been here kind of realized differently and much better, I would argue, in BSG. So
it's also like the entirety of Battlestar Galactica can be seen through the lens of Voyager in a way that I think is underrated. Like, Battlestar Galactica is not about Starfleet and terrorists. It's about military members and civilians. Okay, and now they're a unit and they have to learn to get together. And it's not Janeway and Chakotay. It's Admiral Adama, or originally Commander Adama, and President Rosalind, who have to learn to cooperate from different worlds and make a whole unit out of what they have left. It's clear that his interpretation of BSG was, I'm going to do Voyager, but with blackjack and hookers, in some cases, literally. Yeah. So, it's really something to see some of his commentary. This was 3 years, I guess, before he actually did Battlestar Galactica. I think that came out in 2000. No, maybe 4 years, 2003. I think I was in college when Battlestar Galactica started. So
we've laid out a lot of different ways. I think this episode would have been much better sticking to the actual series of events as it played out, with a little bit more character justification for Janeway. Much more work added to make the Doctor stuff execute better. I think I would have been just as happy, probably even more happy, had the resolution of this plot line been like, on the Equinox, we do things different. And at the end of the day, Janeway, you have no authority over us. We have no authority over you. And unless we're willing to come to blows, which Starfleet captains do not make war with themselves, we can both just be unhappy with each other and go our own separate ways, and kind of rekindle the potential that was Seska, where you had a season-long antagonist creating problems for Voyager to encounter further in its travels, with the ultimate resolution bridging at the end of season 6, taking us into 7, where Starfleet does finally have to confront its own demons and there has to be a reckoning.
I remember us talking about these kinds of themes season 1, I really do. It's a fascinating look into a show that could have been, but ultimately wasn't, is the bottom line for Equinox Part 2. Next episode is actually Ron Moore's only sole writing credit for the entire show. What is it?
Season 6, episode 2, Survival Instinct, and we have what looks like 7 of 9 back in her old full Borg regalia, which, if that's the case, I'm sure she's going to be thrilled. The last time we saw her Borged up was Living Witness, right? Which, again, that was the last time I want to say 7 of 9 got damseled up, was when Living Witness, like, those crazy terrorists boarded the ship and held her somehow at phaser point. Like, it's so unbelievable when she gets got. But whatever. Eager for a culture exchange and friendly contact at a space outpost, Janeway makes her big mistake she always makes and grants shore leave to her crew and rolls out the welcome mat for visitors.
This is a really fascinating episode in terms of character development and sort of like some background on Borg, and there's a lot of nuance to it. And it's definitely you can tell it was in the hands of someone like Ron Moore. So I think we'll enjoy reviewing this one.
All right, man. I'm looking forward to it.
We look forward to having you with us on our next voyage. Please tune in for our review next week. See ya.